And who we have here, hi everyone, this is Tom Friend from Sport Techie. I'm the senior editor there. And welcome to Mainstream Betting, how leagues, media, and gaming companies are adapting. To me, this is the biggest, hottest topic in sports. Legalized betting, legalized gambling in arenas, everywhere else, all these states that have it. And I want to bring everybody here. We have Scott Kaufman-Ross, Senior Vice President, Head of Fantasy and Gaming NBA, and Sarah Slane, founder of the Slane Advisory. Let's bring them on. I want to start with Scott. Your title, Senior Vice President, Head of Fantasy and Gaming. I can't imagine a few years ago that title would ever existed. Tell me how that all came about to have this job.
Sure, Tom. I think we may have an echo to start.
Senior Vice President, Head of Fantasy and Gaming. I can't imagine a few years ago that title.
Hey, Scott.
Hey.
I mean, I feel like I've interviewed you before, so we can do this.
I'll
Why don't you start with your job? Let's talk about you, Scott. Tell us about you.
I'll take a stab at answering the question while Tom sorts out the echo issues. In terms of how I landed here, it was a bit of good fortune and a bit of foresight, I would say, a combination. I was working on our strategy team in 2014 when the concept of daily fantasy was first emerging for the leagues, and it was in early 2014 when the head of the strategy group said we need to look into this whole daily fantasy thing. And as a lifelong fantasy player, I literally raised my hand into the air and I said, I'll take that one. I love fantasy sports. That sounds like one I'll tackle. And studied the industry. And we eventually did a deal with FanDuel, which included an equity stake in the company. And I actually served as a board observer to FanDuel for a number of years. And so that experience kind of positioned me to become the NBA's in-house expert on sports betting, alongside with a gentleman that worked in legal, a guy named Dan Spillane. And Sarah and Dan and I knew Sarah for many years, going back to 2015, 2016, as we were exploring the category. And in particular, right at the same time we did the deal with FanDuel, our commissioner wrote the op-ed in the New York Times that changed the NBA's position on sports betting, which really kind of changed the tenor of the conversation in the US. And since we had taken that position that we were now in favor, we started studying the industry and figuring out what we would do if sports betting would become legal. And then when the Supreme Court agreed to hear that case in 2017, then overturning it in 2018, but we kind of saw the direction this was going and that the change was inevitable. And we created a fully dedicated team to focus on sports betting and fantasy sports. And me being the person who had been the in-house expert over the past couple of years, I was the natural person to lead it. So, kind of right place, right time, and seeing that opportunity. But, was able to kind of get in at the ground floor when we changed our position and helped chart the NBA's path in the space.
Sarah, talk about your entree into this.
Sure. Similar to Scott, right time, right place, a little bit of luck. And some vision, and very fortunate. I come from the gaming industry side, so I worked at MGM Resorts for close to 8 years, and then worked at the American Gaming Association, which was the national trade group that represents the casino industry, so the tribal commercial supplier community, and then eventually the daily fantasy sports companies. So back at, I think it was the end of 2014, when Commissioner Silver had come out with his op-ed, maybe it was 15, that really was the impetus for the industry to take a step back, the gaming industry to take a step back and say to ourselves, what is our position on sports betting? New Jersey had kind of their own thing going on for a long time. Daily fantasy sports was certainly continuing to rise. The likes of FanDuel and DraftKings were, this was prior to them spending a bunch of money before that football season that really drew a lot of attention to the legality of daily fantasy sports. And the gaming industry sort of sitting on the sideline saying, is this the next emerging thing? And what is our position going to be on it? So I led an industry-wide initiative and went through a year-long process with all the gaming companies to draw and drive a consensus position on sports betting. Thankfully, came out of that. We wanted to see legalization, and then I worked very directly with a lot of the stakeholders within the sports betting ecosphere. So we knew that this was a bigger issue than just the impact it was going to have on the gaming companies, but rather it was about sports and media properties and educating them about our industry and how highly regulated we are and how we wanted to work in partnership. So got to know Scott, got to know Dan, got to know a lot of the his peers at the other leagues and some of the media companies as well.
Well, my background, I was at ESPN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. So I've been in locker rooms from during the 80s. And I can tell you right now, you walk into a baseball clubhouse and it's as big as day, no gambling. We all know the Pete Rose story. It's the huge no-no. And to see the transformation that this country's undergoing right now is literally amazing. If you would never have foreseen it back then. So I want to talk to you first of all about there are half the states in this country with legalized betting. You've got Maryland, Louisiana, and Arizona's fired up now. The Arizona Diamondback Stadium there's live betting there now. The Phoenix Suns Arena. So where is this headed? Sarah, first take this one. Where is it headed?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think one of the questions I get asked a lot is what's been the biggest surprise since the federal law was struck down, and easy answer, it's the pace at which this is rolled out from a legality standpoint. So once the Supreme Court ruled that the federal law was no longer applicable, it empowered then the states to legalize on a state-by-state basis. And as you had mentioned, now we're up to 32 states that have enacted and legalized sports betting. Not all of them have sports betting in place because they're still working on rules and regulations. But I mean, if you had asked me 3 years ago if I thought that was even in the realm of possibility, I would have laughed in your face. I worked in gaming legislation for a long, long time. It takes a long time to get things passed. Sports betting just has a different nomenclature, and I think daily fantasy sports really laid the groundwork for legalization, and it softened up legislators. I think that there is a lot of people that participate in sports betting that they don't necessarily participate in casino gaming, but it just is much more acceptable. So where do I think things are headed? I think we're up to 18 states of those 32 that have mobile sports betting. So the states all have a different regulatory framework. Some have mobile, some have retail, some have a combination of both. Like I said, of those 32, 18 are permitting mobile betting, which is, I think at the end of the day, when you take a state like New Jersey, 90% of those bets that are taking place on sports right now are happening on the mobile platform. So I think we're going to continue to see, if states had not adopted mobile the first go around, that they're going to come back and adopt it. And certainly I think that we're going to continue to see states bring on legalized sports betting. We still have some big outstanding states out there right now, although the dominoes continue to fall with the legalization of sports betting in New York. I envision that California will not be too short behind, and somewhere like Texas, somewhere in the future as well.
That would be huge. That would be huge. Honestly, Scott, I feel like the NBA was ahead of the curve with your job and what you're doing. But what do you think the future is? You've got, she said 32 states. What's ahead here? Is it going to be 50? Is it going to be everywhere?
Well, listen, we may not get to 50. There are some states like Utah, for example, that I'm not sure we should count on passing sports betting legislation anytime soon. But I certainly think in a time horizon of 5 years, maybe 10, but more optimistically 5, we'll be in 45 to 48 states or something to that effect. And, like Sarah, and Sarah's known this world a lot longer than I have, but I've gotten to understand the complexities in the states and the different stakeholders that have to navigate between state lotteries and tribal gaming and existing casinos and convenience store lobbies in some places. The stakeholders would surprise you. And a lot of times the holdup is not actually about sports betting. It's about what comes with sports betting and the adjacent
Correct.
things. And hey, if we're going to look at sports betting, we should look at online casino, or we should look at adding another physical casino. And that's when these things start to get complicated. Because what we've seen, and I think what ultimately led us to change our position is that, sports betting is somewhat unique to other forms of gaming, in my opinion, in that if you make it illegal, people will just find a way to do it illegally. And that was why we changed our position. Look, we still do believe that sports betting poses fundamental integrity risks to our game. I mean, that remains true. But what we have found is that a federal prohibition on it just serves to push that activity underground. It doesn't eliminate that activity. It just makes it just pushes it to a place where we can't monitor it and there's no transparency. And so we're actually in a better place to protect the integrity of our competitions if there's legal, regulated, transparent monitoring. All of those things kind of provide a better place. So yes, we still have the signs up in our locker rooms, no gambling, and nothing's changed. But the only thing that's changed here is that we realize it's better for it to be happening out in the open, where we have the tools to protect ourselves, rather than having it be through offshore websites and bookies. And so, from that perspective, I think when states start to understand that, hey, we're not authorizing an activity that wouldn't otherwise happen. We're bringing it out of the underground and into the sunlight. We're decriminalizing it. We're taxing it. We're regulating it. That argument usually resonates with state legislators and regulators and most of the stakeholders. It's really when you bring those other things into the equation. It's the conversations, and Sarah's a little bit closer to this. They're not should we legalize sports betting. It's how and who. Those are where we usually get hung up.
Sarah, I want to jump into with you on this, and this is when I've always thought this. For instance, the Washington Capitals, they have a game tonight, preseason game. And in a couple of years, they're going to have the jersey patch of Caesar Sportsbook on their uniforms. They have a sports book in their arena. You walk in, you get dropped off in your car or whatever, you drive to the arena and you walk by the sports book, you see the patch on your jersey. What is he talked about the inherent risks of this. What's your take on that?
Yeah,
jersey
100%. Look, this was one of the initiatives that I led when I was at the American Gaming Association, and we really viewed sports betting as a bigger opportunity for the gaming industry writ large, right? Like, sports betting in and of itself, from a gaming perspective, is a very low margin business. At the end of the day, where we really wanted to see the industry head was a mainstream of the business, a normalization of the business. I think we're getting there. And then secondarily was just moving from what was traditionally a retail activity to mobile. So online casino and online sports betting. Online casino has certainly been a much slower roll than the acceptance of online sports betting. With that, though, as you mentioned, what was the downside and the risk? The downside and the risk now is just overexposure. And you don't have to look far. We, as part of our initiative back in 2015 and 16, we looked across the pond and talked to a lot of international operators about their experiences and what were great lessons learned. And I remember talking to a high-level executive at Bet365, and he's like, look, if you can get in front of the advertising piece of this and you can put regulations and self-imposed restrictions on the industry, you're going to be better served in the long run. And I think that was absolutely true. So it sort of stuck that nugget of information back in my brain, and then said to the industry, I think we really need to get in front of this issue. And we developed a code of conduct. So through the American Gaming Association, which is still there, even though I've departed, is an industry-led initiative to self-regulate that all of the gaming companies have agreed upon. The other good piece about the United States versus globally, when you look at the oversaturation of advertising, is the leagues. Leagues have done, I think, a great job in monitoring and sort of slow rolling.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm curious about the patch on the Capitals jersey. What's your take on that? I mean,
I think that this is it started off as a crawl before we walk exercise. I'm not at all surprised to see that this is where things are headed and that we're going to see more integrations. I think the question is going to start to become not if, but when, and when is it too much, and when is there a backlash? So no, I'm not terribly surprised. Look, I think every league, I work with all of them in some form or capacity. Every league has a different set of rules in place. Some are stricter on some other issues, like the NHL won't allow You mentioned that Caesars has a sports book inside Capital One. During game time, you cannot access the sports book. I can't remember if NBA, if you guys allow that, but some other leagues don't have a problem with that. So everyone has their own, sort of model and regulations. Not terribly surprised, honestly, that the patch has moved forward.
Scott, and you can only speak to the NBA. What is the NBA policy going for? Not policy, but what's your sense? If a team wants to have, MGM on their jersey, whatever. What do you think?
Yeah, that's not currently permitted in our rules. As I think Sarah put it well, we want to take a crawl before we walk, before we run approach here, and we've kind of slowly but surely been rolling out new guidelines and opening things up. And at least for us, that wasn't an asset that we were prepared to open up just yet. We'll continue to look at the industry and what's appropriate. And listen, I think that Sarah is spot on, and the industry is trying to self-regulate, although I think that can be a bit more challenging as the quest for market share intensifies. But we have restrictions because we see what happens internationally. Italy and Spain are markets where there's full prohibitions on all sports betting advertising. The UK has a whistle-to-whistle ban, and we've seen reports that actually, and Sarah may know more, that it's coming that they're going to have to take the brands off the shirts.
No, it's been reported that in England, the soccer, the football over there they're taking it off. That is the dichotomy here, is that the capitals have it on or putting it on, and over in Europe they're taking it off.
Yeah.
And what's your take on that, Scott? Scott, you can finish on that, and then Sarah from there.
Yeah, listen, so for us, we're just monitoring all of that stuff, and we're being cautious, and we've heard that was under consideration for a while, and so we didn't think the time was right to open that up in the backdrop. But again, I think Sarah said it well. Some leagues are more permissive on some things and less on others. So we don't judge anyone for what they're looking to do. We didn't feel the time was right for the NBA, and we'll see where it goes from there.
So I would say the difference, like in Europe, is it's very disparate. You don't have the leadership of the league, which is what we have in the US, thankfully. Like we have the regulatory sort of piece from the league's perspective. And on the jersey advertising, I mean, they've had legal sports betting now for 30 years, 20
right,
at least on a mobile. So look, they also allow illegal websites. They allow some advertising that occurs, that are operators that are not operating legally. I can't foresee that happen. I definitely cannot foresee that happening here. That is a massive bone of contention for the gaming industry, and I know the leagues support that as well because they don't pay taxes and they don't have to play by the rules. So I think it is an apples to oranges comparison. Don't get me wrong. I still think that it's a good model to learn from.
Scott, do you get a sense that the league, and maybe you can answer this, whether the NBA will talk to players? Do you guys have meetings with players about what's going on in the industry, the betting industry, and warn them again about the integrity of the game? I just want to get your take on that.
Absolutely. With sports betting rolling out, we've increased our efforts on training and education and explaining to players, what's permitted, what's not, what they're going to see, being careful on information dissemination and, keeping injuries and things like that confidential. So yes, we've done quite a bit of education and training of our players as part of this, and not just players, by the way, but coaches, trainers, team employees, league employees. If you're an employee of an NBA team or a WNBA team or the NBA office or the WNBA office, you're fully prohibited from betting on the NBA or any of our related leagues. And so making sure we educate people, on what to look out for, what's permitted, what's not permitted, is a huge part of our efforts as this rolls out. And obviously we've had all those rules in place forever. Even when sports betting wasn't legal, you couldn't go to Vegas and bet on the NBA, or you certainly couldn't bet illegally with a book, with an offshore site or a local bookie. But it's increasing that education now that it's more out, that it's more obvious, and that you're seeing advertising reminding folks of what this means, and making sure that they have the resources they need to understand it, and that they understand what's permitted and not.
I have a couple more questions before we jump to some of the audience's questions. I do see that, recently, this is for Sarah because it's about the NFL. Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, has invested in a fantasy sports and gaming company, Boom Entertainment, along with Adam Schefter from ESPN, which is a whole other thing. That a media guy and an owner are there together investing in the same things. But what's your take with an owner investing in a gaming company?
Old news. I think they all invested in FanDuel and DraftKings back when they were daily fantasy sports companies.
Okay.
I mean, look, I'm probably not in a position to. I can have a very unabashed opinion about that. I'm sure the leagues are. They have to thread that needle in a very careful way. Look, I think that the overarching concern, and it was one that the industry had from the beginning, is one about integrity. And, by having an owner involved in a gaming Boom, first of all, I'm involved in Boom, so I can tell you right away, they don't control any part of the bet. So there's no direct contact with the consumer. I think there has to be absolutely protections put in place. I think the leagues have done a really good job at doing that. I know they're going to continue to do that because we used to say this at the outset, between the gaming industry and the sports industry, there were, some things that we did not agree upon, but majority of the stuff we did, and at the helm of all of that, the center of that was integrity. If you lose integrity around the bet and you lose integrity around the sport, you're in a bad place. And it's got much larger ramifications, quite frankly, than sports betting. You're talking about, fans disengaging because they don't believe that what they're watching is actually real.
Right. Great answer. I went for both of you, and I'll start with Scott on this one. We talked about this when we talked previously. What about the convergence between media and betting, with betting companies seeming to become media companies and media companies seemingly becoming betting companies? It's recently DAZN is opening, getting involved in betting, it looks like. So what is that landscape? I'm going to start with Scott on this one.
Yeah, look, I think this is a little bit more uncharted territory when you look across the other markets. There's been some pockets, Sky Bet, Sky licensing its brand for Sky Bet, and a couple other examples across the world. But the pace at which these two industries are coming together is unlike anything we've seen across the world. You're seeing, obviously we saw Fox Bet, Fox license their brand and Barstool sort of be acquired, but we're seeing companies like Fubo TV and The Score become direct operators of sports betting. And I think you're seeing it from both directions too, right? You've got DraftKings that has acquired a number of media assets. They bought Vegas Stats and Information Network. They bought the rights to Dan Le Batard's podcast. So they're trying to do more. And I think you put it right. There are media companies trying to become betting companies and betting companies trying to become media. And I think what folks see is that, betting is a measure of engagement, right? The people who bet on sports, they are likely to consume more content. They are invested in more games. They watch games for longer periods of time. And so by integrating those two things together, you can create a more engaged fan that is both, more likely to watch the game for longer periods of time, and therefore in turn more likely to bet more because they're watching the game longer. And so I do think you're going to see an increase in this trend, but what we're seeing is just the regulations make it really, really challenging. And that, going state by state and licensing each platform and integrating that into one experience, I think it's going to happen, but I think it's going to take a little bit more time. There are technical concerns with latency and integration and dual authentication, and then there are regulatory concerns and getting the regulators comfortable that, if you're not a licensed operator, but you're taking the bet on behalf of a third party, whether or not that needs to be treated the same way as treating the platform. And so we're seeing this convergence, and we understand the thesis behind it, and I think it will continue. But I think where we're headed is going to take a little bit of time.
Sarah?
So the funny thing is the thesis was one, not that I came up with it, but it was.
You did come up with it.
I drove. We did AGA when I was there. We did the first study with Nielsen, and basically we took, at that time, because we didn't have enough sample size on legal sports betting, but we took daily fantasy sports and we took March Madness brackets, And we looked then we did a huge sample size of viewer consumption. And basically, I wanted that material as a talking point to go to talk to media companies about why they wanted and should have legalized sports betting and support our initiative. I hope it's true. I mean, I hope that pans out. I think certainly we've seen that with daily fantasy sports. That was a good test case, and sports betting is going to be daily fantasy sports on steroids. I get nervous sometimes. First of all, I get nervous about the oversaturation. We talked about that, but I also get nervous sometimes that people think that sports betting is going to be this panacea for everything. I mean, there has been clearly a drop off in consumption of sports, live sports writ large. Do I think sports betting is going to help that? Of course. Do I think it's going to solve the issue across the board? No. And I think that you keep what the problem right now, in my opinion, is that everyone's going after the low hanging fruit. It's like, I get it. You're going after the same people that were probably illegally betting, or maybe they were betting, but not betting as much. How are you actually going to draw in new audiences? How are you going to get someone like Sarah to go bet on sports and consume more of what you're selling? And so it feels right now like we're scratching the surface and everyone's plowing ahead with one kind of objective. I want to see creativity. I want to see this done in a way that's interesting and different and new, and it does get people to engage in a way that is entertaining and it's not in your face and turning people off.
My last question before we go to the audience questions is in play micro betting. We just ran an article on our website Sport Techie about Simple Bet, where they're making it where you can literally in your phone you can watch the game, bet at the same time. It's one-stop shopping, and wow, so. What is the take in the industry on that, Scott? I mean, it's in the NBA, on something like that. Where you bet whether LeBron's going to make this free throw or not. Whether Giannis is going to dunk in the next 2 minutes. I don't know what there's all these bets. What do you take on that?
Listen, our take is we want to embrace whatever the fan wants, and if that's the way the fan wants to engage with our broadcast, and if that's the way the fan wants to bet, we absolutely want to embrace that. And we know the folks at Simple Bet very well. We actually did an experiment with them last year in FanDuel where we created a free-to-play version of the game. Kind of having those next possession, next shot, but doing also from a free-to-play perspective. And I know they're going to be rolling that product out for real money pretty soon. And what we've seen historically is that in-play betting has just been betting on the final score, the over/under, the money line, but doing so during the live game, right? Which the NBA is actually perfect for, right? We have so many changes in score, and so if you're betting on the spread or the money line, there's ample opportunity for a fan to change their opinion about what's going to happen based on the 10-0 run that the Warriors just had, or LeBron picked up a second foul and he's out for the remainder of the quarter. So that changes your opinion. There's a lot of ways to change your opinion. I do think the concept of micro betting is fascinating. We haven't seen it become mainstream just yet, but we think it's really interesting. And again, we'll go where the fan wants us to go. And if that's how fans want to engage with our game and it keeps them interested for longer periods of time and more engaged in our product, we'll certainly lean in and work together with Simple Bet or any of their operator partners on doing it. But we'll let the fan dictate what the right experience is.
Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a big supporter, believer, advisor to Simple Bet. So I believe in the product. I believe in the concept of it. I think that there are some hurdles that, again, we got to get through on latency issues and acclimation and acquisition of customers. But comparatively, if you look at Europe, 70% of the bets are happening through that kind of micro betting during the game. So it would be a huge paradigm shift. I think it's going to happen. I think it's not if, but when it'll happen. And again, when we're talking about that fan engagement piece and consumers, engaging more and watching more of it, that's kind of at the crux of it, right? Is that these fun little simple bets make it really interesting and they make it fun and they keep you captivated when you're watching a 4-hour baseball game.
I wanted to ask this question from the audience. How do you feel like younger adults are learning about sports betting and the apps available, and how can we protect them the younger adults, younger kids, whoever's doing it. What's your feeling on that, Scott? You can start with that.
Sure. So we have been approaching how we integrate sports betting into our platforms and our broadcasts as an opt-in experience. We believe that the fans that want to engage with sports betting, that are of age, that are in a legal state, that want to use this as the way to engage with our sport, we want to make that available to them. But we're trying to avoid thrusting sports betting upon everyone. Again, whether they be not of legal age, whether they be in a state where it's not legal, or frankly, they're just not interested and that's not how they choose to engage with the NBA. So for example, we have not integrated betting into our primary telecasts, but we have what we call an alternate telecast. So we have something called NBA Bet Stream, which is a separate broadcast that focuses from a sports betting perspective. So we have betting focused commentary, we have a betting focused graphics package, and we say these are the fans that are watching our games through the lens of sports betting. We want to give them that tailored experience, but not everybody wants that. So we're not putting that on ESPN and TNT, or at least on the primary channel. And we've done this on our League Pass product. ESPN did a version of it on ESPN2 in conjunction with the primary telecast on ESPN. And we similarly are doing that on our digital platforms. So we created NBA Bet, which is a separate content initiative on NBA platforms, but it's a separate betting page on NBA.com, a separate tab on the app, a separate set of social handles. We have a dedicated NBA TV betting show where we give the fan the opportunity to say, this is what I'm interested in, this is the content I want, and make it available to them. But very much for that question, we're trying to make sure we're only serving up betting to the fan that's it's appropriate for and that's interested in.
Sarah, we have 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you this question. How do you manage fan expectations and demands versus the legal rules you have to follow? What's your take on that?
That's a good question, because Scott alluded to this. Like, a lot of the complaints about the clunky apps or accessibility or whatever getting on, it really has to do with the regulations. It's not so much the operators, it's that the regulatory structure framework, and it goes back to actually your earlier question about, what's the industry doing to make sure that they're not targeting younger adults or problem gamblers or anything like that. There's so many regulations in place that the industry has to adhere to, or they run the risk of losing their gaming licenses. So I think that there's a lot that the industry would like to do. The complexities surrounding a state-by-state rollout from a regulatory perspective are immense.
Last thing, Scott, yesterday, Spencer Dinwiddie came out and talked about how he tried to sell his Galaxy on the Wizards jersey patch, and that was against league rules for basically potentially a conflict of interest. I just wonder what your take on that is, if you have anything on that.
Yeah, I don't have anything particular to add on that one. But I would just add on to what Sarah was just saying, that in addition to managing fan expectations and the legal rules, we also have to go back to where we started this conversation, which is just also managing oversaturation. And so, while there are things that might be legal or there are things that the fans may want, we do have to be careful not to go too far, too fast, and risk the over-regulation that we've seen in other markets. So I just think that's an important thing to reinforce, because a healthy legal sports betting industry that works in conjunction with the leagues and the broadcasters is what we all want, and we have to be prudent to make sure that continues.
Guys, I want to thank you for your honesty. It's a subject that's out there. It needs to be addressed. You did a great job with it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Move on to the next one, guys.
Thank you.